Homeschool How To. I'm Cheryl, and I left the life of classrooms and cubicles for home educating in the countryside. But I have no idea how to homeschool, so I interview the people who do. Join me on my quest to learn all the ways there is to homeschool. Welcome. With us today, I have Rosemary Labrie from New Jersey. Welcome, Rosemary. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I would like to start out by asking you just how many kids do you have and their age?
Okay, so I have four, and I have been finished homeschooling now for a few years because my youngest is 20. So their ages are 20, I'm going to try and get this right, soon to be 24, 27, and 29.
Oh,
And they
those
were
must have
all
been fun ages.
homeschooled. Yeah, it's so strange to be looking back, which is all I do these days is look back on all those years. And they're now in relationships where they meet people who say, "You were homeschooled?" Oh, like just like, in elementary school. And they're like, "Nope, all the way through high school. I went to college, but homeschooled." And people are always, they're just so interested in like, what was your life like? And I love hearing my young adult kids talk about their experiences because they're all extremely happy that they didn't go the traditional route, and it was a blast. I had so much fun. It's very easy to find homeschoolers who are doing it, like they're currently in doing that wet work, right? And their kids are little and they're in the weeds, they're tired, there's so much going on. But it's hard to find people who are done with the job. And I mean, I have a career now. I've moved on in my life from doing a lot of things, but I'm totally finished with home education. And but I love to talk about it. And it's when I listen to other people talk about homeschooling, it's always people who are currently doing the job. It's never the ones who are done and are now in the next life, grandparenting little ones or whatever. So yeah, I fall in that category.
Well, it's funny that you say that because the episode I released this past weekend, which by the time we release this one, it will have been a little bit back. I think episode 23 was with Deb Harris, and she is in the same realm as you, but we were talking about that and how there were not many people homeschooling back in the 80s and 90s when she was doing it with her
Right.
kids, and she had 6 kids and lived in Chicago. And now she is a data scientist in her career, but and it was hard for her to make ends meet with just the one income on a family with 6 kids.
Yes.
And she had talked
Yes.
about, I would clean a house for a woman on the weekend just to have money for groceries. And then now here she is, later in life, looking back on the fun that she had, the bonds that she had with her kids, and still do, and how deep those bonds are
Mhm.
because of what the home education allowed them to have over the years. And she's just loving it. So that's so great to hear that this is more common than not, right?
It is. And those years when you're raising children, whether you're homeschooling or not, but when you're raising kids, it goes by so quickly. Everyone says that. It sounds so trite, but it really does zip by. And I remember when my husband and I were first making the decision to homeschool, it was for the first year. Our oldest was going into kindergarten, and I said, I think I want to homeschool him. And he was like, "Well, it's kindergarten. Like, how badly can one mess up kindergarten, right? So go ahead and try that." So I did, and it was wonderful. And we just did it one year at a time, and then more kids came along, and the next thing I knew, they were going off to college. I mean, it really was like that. Like the next thing I realized, I was filling out college applications, and I realized, well, my work is probably done. I'm very, very glad that I gave a quarter of a century to them. You know, if you have like a skill set, like let's say you're well organized, you're a good cook, you're whatever loving person, your kids should be the beneficiary of those skills.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working at the time. I had a career. I had my kids later in life. I have four, and I had them at ages 37, 40, 42, and 46. Not the
Really?
way most people do it. Not sure I would recommend it either. I had my career first. I was a manager at Price Waterhouse when I met my husband, and I wasn't planning to stop working. And I never even knew what home education was. And then, we got married, and then we were expecting our first son. And around the seventh month, I thought, well, I'm pretty good with like admin stuff and details. I'm pretty organized. I think I want to give that gift to my family, to my husband and my son. I didn't know I was going to have three more, and I didn't know I was going to homeschool. But those skills really, really carried me through those years. And I went back to work when I was done, and I literally picked up where I left off. And I thought, so many days I think to myself, yeah, I'm really glad I gave it to them, because when you stop working, you are so replaceable. You are highly replaceable. I work at the Children's Hospital in a management position. If I left tomorrow, they'll find somebody to fill my shoes. I'm not foolish enough to think that I'm irreplaceable. But in my children's lives, I was irreplaceable. And so
I
I'm really glad I gave them that time.
I literally said that exact same thing in the Deb Harris podcast because I work in government right now. And like you, I had my career, I've been there for 15 years. And, they, especially in government work, it's you'll get this pension, this pension, this pension. And that's all you're focused on for the 30 years you're there is your promotions in order to get your pension. It's never a promotion because that's the work I want to do. And especially in government
Mm.
work, because it's all civil service exams, you never get the job that you like went to school for or have a passion in. It's
Right.
I had this score on a test and this was a job available and I was the next in line and that's the one I got. So for the
Right.
last 15 years, I've been in a cubicle thinking of myself as a career woman. And for what? Because I got placed in positions because I happened to get a score on a test. And a lot of that's trained by society. And
Yes.
so, and I had a first husband in my 20s and then married my husband now when I was 34, or I don't know, 33 maybe. Had my son when
Hmm.
I was 34 and my daughter when I was 38. So I'm 39 now. And I'm like, I don't think I can go back. And just like you said, I'm not needed there. I haven't been there since last August. I am sure the government hasn't skipped a beat. I'll tell you what, people are still getting their benefits and, like
Right.
I'm not missed. I'm completely replaceable. But I can't even leave my daughter with her grandparents for more than 4 hours before she's like looking for a breast and nurse, I need to nurse mom. I want my mom. And
Oh,
that is just such a good feeling. And why are we? I mean, we were watching a show recently, my son and I, and they were talking about how walruses stay with their mom for 3 whole years. And I'm like, they expect mothers to give up their babies at 6 weeks and just go back to work. It's
oh yeah,
really
I see it every
wild.
day. I see it every day. I couldn't do it, but I also understand that some moms don't have a choice. There are
Absolutely.
single moms, there are moms who they can't not have that check. And if they're an
Yeah.
essential worker, they have to show up. Then it's daycare.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, not everyone has the choice, but I really believe that every parent that can make it work financially should give it a try. That should try it. Just try
Yeah.
it. I was listening to the news not that a week or two ago, and our Vice President Kamala Harris was talking about artificial intelligence. So she was educating an audience that didn't need to be educated, by the way, on what artificial intelligence was. And I'm listening to her, and she went through it like very, very slowly, saying the machine learns from what you put into it. So, what words you say, what ideas you have, that's what goes into the machine, and that's what comes out. And that's why it's so important that we know what's going into artificial intelligence so that it's not racist and biased and prejudiced. And I thought she just perfectly described why parents want to homeschool their kids. Because
Yeah.
little kids, their minds are the machines. And yes, we care very much what's going into the machine because we know it eventually comes out. So we'd like to have a say about what goes in, right? I wish
Boy.
that I could change the title of her speech to Why You Should Home Educate Your Kids.
Yeah. And I bet that was them promoting some sorts of censorship We have to
Oh,
censor
yeah.
and have censorship because of what goes in, comes out, garbage in, garbage out. But that, that's exactly, yeah. You don't want your kid going to
Right.
the government schools because garbage in, garbage out. We want them to be
Right.
thinkers. So, what sort of
Exactly.
approaches did you take with your kids? I mean, right now, there's everything from the traditional, like a Becca curriculum stuff
Hmm.
to people that unschool. And that's a big thing now
Hmm.
where we just kind of go out in nature and we see a
Hmm.
caterpillar and hey, let's go to the library and get all the books on caterpillars and watch videos on caterpillars and then the life cycle
Hmm.
and take it from there or whatever's kind of tickling
Right.
my kids' fancy. And I respect both of them and they all, I'm sure, can work for so many different ways. So what was your approach?
Well, it was a mix of both completely hands off, letting them run crazy, and cracking the whip. There were things I did not relent on, and that had primarily to do with math facts, making sure they knew their math facts. It was automatic. It wasn't a labored slow, let me try and think what 9 times 7 is kind of thing. It was a lot of drilling. Everything else was pretty chill. I made sure they knew how to read early on. I'm very blessed in that of the four of them, no one was dyslexic or had any kind of challenges learning to read, and they all learned to read very young. One was reading at 2.5. The others
Oh
read
my,
between age 3 and 4. And we would go to the libraries. We belonged to like 4 or 5 different libraries. Every week we went a few times a week. We'd bring these big bags and they got to pick the book. So even if it was a picture book with 3 words in it, I didn't say anything. It was like, okay. And then they would come home and it was like Christmas. They would be so happy because they each had a giant bag of books and they would just sit and look at the books they wanted. They had 15-minute reading lesson and that I did not, unless somebody was sick or really ornery, we did not skip that 15. They were able to read like level 1, level 2 books by using that approach. Frankly, all the rest of the time of the day when they were in early elementary school, they were outside playing and we
mm-hmm.
were going places. We traveled and did things. I never had them tested at all until they were like late middle school.
Okay.
Then I started to think about, because they were bright, and I at the time wanted them to get into the best colleges that they could get into.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that eventually they were going to have to take the SAT. And I didn't know, I mean, every mother who homeschools her kids knows if there's a deficit. I never met a mom who had a kid aged 10 or 12, maybe the kid struggled reading or struggled with math, that the mom was not aware. Mom is aware because it's painful to get it done when there's a problem.
Yeah.
So I didn't have any sense that there were any problems, but I wanted to know how they were going to do. So they started taking tests like 7th or 8th grade, and there were no issues at all. So, especially for the reading, because that was something that they always did voluntarily. They would sit and read paper books. I read a lot of paper books. So does my husband. So the behavior was modeled for them.
Mm-hmm.
Also, at least two, and one could argue three, were raised before the iPhones were so
Yeah.
ubiquitous. Like the
Yeah.
fourth one, iPhones were ubiquitous, and he stopped reading paper books at around 6th or 7th grade. He was
Okay.
too cool for that. He just wanted to play on the iPhone. I didn't have that issue with the other three because they didn't have smartphones.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the era in which I was raising them was a little bit different. I do think it's harder today to
Yeah.
get kids to sit down and read paper books. So since we had as a goal for them to get into the best schools they could, we traveled, we visited colleges very young, like starting in middle school. I drove all along the East Coast and we visited every top college just so they could see, like, this is the goal. This is why I ask you to work hard. This is
Mm-hmm.
why I want you to do preparation for the SAT, because since you're homeschooled, that kind of matters, that test, if you want to get into this school. Long story short, the first two did go to an Ivy League university. The third one got into Princeton, said no, went to the Naval Academy. And my fourth, who is an uneven landscape of skills, let's say, if JJ were here right now, he would say it himself. He's gifted in languages. He can learn languages like nobody's business.
Wow.
And he got a scholarship when he was in high school to study in Macedonia, tiny little country that borders on Bulgaria. He's now completely fluent in Macedonia, decided at the time he wanted to go to college in the Balkans because he thinks Balkan people are really cool. So he's actually in college at the American University in Bulgaria and loves
Wow.
it there. Says he's going to go back. Yes.
Wow.
So they're all fully launched. Everyone's kind of off on doing their thing. But in retrospect, because of the things that my first two were exposed to at University of Pennsylvania, where they went to school, the shock that they were in with helicopter parenting from the other students, like parents calling, like they had different roommates over the years, parents calling them, did you study for this test? What did you get on this quiz? So and so. I never asked them once what their grades were. I didn't even know until they told me what their grades are. I didn't hound them because I knew they were going to get good grades. I knew they were going to study. I knew them as students, right? And it just the environment of Penn. The environment is, to say it's woke doesn't even scratch the surface. So there was a lot of stuff to resist every day for them. And while now they are participating in alumni events, for the first year or two, they didn't want to have anything to do with alumni events. They were like, no, I survived it. My first one had a double major and graduated with honors. So he did really well. My daughter was a science major. She did well, but it was a lot harder for her because she had chosen a STEM topic at Penn. So she lives in Austin. He lives in New York, and one's in San Diego, one's in Bulgaria. So my husband and I are getting ready to retire. It's like, where are we going to live? It's like they like Kansas. That's kind of like in the middle of everybody.
Yeah,
If we pick a point on the map, that's in the middle, right?
whoever has the most kids or has the first kid, that's where you go.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. But
So,
to go back to your question about teaching style and all that, I started out very organized, had a list of everything that we were going to do every day. I had my 3-ring binders, I had my checklists, and it went pretty well until they got a little bit older, and they definitely wanted to have more say over how they spent their time. And they were developing interests. One was doing gymnastics. My sons all rowed for a rowing club in South Jersey, so that takes up a lot of time. And then they made a lot of friends through rowing. So they had a different emphasis. Like, okay, I'm going to take this class at this community college. I'll do this one online. I need to be done by 3, everything, because I need to get the rowing practice by 3:30. And so they had different priorities by the time they got to middle school. In a way, it got easier because all I had to do was reverse engineer things into their schedules. For all the hard math and all the hard science, all of it, I farmed out to tutors or small learning groups or the local community college.
okay.
I did not, except for biology, I did not attempt to teach any of those. I just don't know enough. Even if I could learn it temporarily, my knowledge would never have been fluid enough to like answer a question that they might have had. I mean, I would say like, wait, I got to look that up. You miss the moment then. There's
Yeah.
really, I believe in teachers, and I think that finding good teachers, when you homeschool, you can actually find the best.
Oh,
You
really?
can find the best person who might even have access to a lab. We did that for physics. It was an ex-physics teacher, and she had a lab in her house. It was fantastic. She
That's
was an
really cool.
outstanding teacher. I couldn't, and we shared. There were 2 other students, and so we shared the cost of a 3-hour class once a week.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
those are the kinds of creative
exactly.
things that you can do. You can do anything you want, depending on your budget. You can skin academically, more so now, frankly, than back then, because post-pandemic, there's so much more available
Yeah.
online that I think that homeschoolers might drown in a sea of options more than when the options were fewer.
Yeah.
When I was doing
Especially
it, the
because
online options.
internet was fewer. So for you to
Yeah.
even connect with other families nearby that were homeschooling, it was harder to connect if you didn't have the internet to, oh, hey, here's a Facebook group in our area. Let's go join them. And yeah, I would imagine certain parts, like you said, were easier because you didn't have to worry about them on an iPhone. But other parts were harder,
Right.
like the connecting and seeing all that's available to you. Now, do you
Right.
think college, because I was just talking to someone about this, that
Hmm.
college should, that every career, or that should be the goal, or are we kind of in, I feel like we're kind of in a phase where the college is so expensive, and
Hmm.
if we're like, there are jobs that if we're working
Hmm.
on this creativity in our children for, the 13 years, do a lot of them need to go to college anymore?
Yeah. I think the answer is no.
Yeah.
I think the answer is no. And if I had that decision to do over again, I think my daughter would choose to go. I think all my sons would say, nah, I just would
Yeah.
like to get to work. I'd like to start to find out what I want to do for a living because my oldest son is in finance. Now, he was a philosophy and a Russian major. Really doesn't have anything to do with the work he's doing right now.
Okay.
His degree is very useful from Penn, but he himself would say, you could have saved yourself a lot of money.
You have your babies with you for, the first 18 years. How do you handle sending them off?
That was, well, you'll find out by the time your son is 17 or 18, there's not much telling them what you want them to do or be.
Yeah.
They have a good sense of it. With Andy, I tried talking to him about other universities. He visited many other universities. He was the fastest lightweight rower in New Jersey in the year that he was applying to colleges, and he had almost perfect SAT scores. So he was recruited by every major university. He said,
Wow.
no, I want to serve my country. And I said, why? No, we don't come from Peter and I are not military I didn't understand it. I really, really didn't know anybody who was in that life. I didn't know anything about the Naval Academy. He was absolutely certain that's what he wanted to do. All four of my kids traveled abroad when they were in high school. I applied for scholarships. I got really good at that. That was what I helped a lot of other students in New Jersey with, getting scholarships to travel abroad. So starting for each of them, starting at age 14 or 15, they went on the other side of the world for anywhere from 1 to 6 months.
Now,
And I was not there.
was that part of a
So
homeschool
it was,
opportunity, or was that through a community college, like they were getting college credits for that?
no, these are state sponsored scholarships. They are open to school kids and they are open to homeschool kids. So the NSLIY scholarship, the AYLP scholarship, AFS has some scholarships, Yes Abroad, the Congress Bungstad scholarship. So basically, the state pays you, students that is, to go and live in a foreign country. Usually it's a country where we've had some conflict, or it's a country with a high Muslim population. The goal, of course, is to have other countries see that American students, and to be ambassadors for your country. But you go to school while you're there.
Okay.
Whatever grade you're in and whatever school they put you in, you go to school while you're there, unless you're going over summer. So each of them had spent months away in another country where I really couldn't help them navigate the world at all.
Yeah.
And I got better out of just from the practice at letting go. And I think that helps a lot. By the time your kid's ready to go to college, you do want to be able to let go. And I
Yeah.
think my own kids would say, I'm pretty good at letting go.
Now,
I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
do you think your kids will homeschool their children? Have you ever asked them?
Yes, I do ask them that. The first three, John, Nora, and Andy, all say yes. They all say yes. They're very, very interested. Well, they see the difference between themselves and friends their age. Friends their age, especially females. So my daughter, she sees a reticence, an anxiety, a nervousness, a fearfulness in her friends that she thinks is a carryover from all their school years, where if you're the first one to show up for a party, you're weird. There's something's wrong with you. Like, she's always the one that will go to the restaurant first and wait for her friends to get there. No one will walk in. Or she'll talk to the maitre d' saying, yeah, we're going to have 5 more arriving. Like, we'll just wait here. Like, they're fearful. They lack agency. And I think that the greatest gift that you give a young homeschool student is the agency. They're in charge of their own days. They might not be when they're 5, but by the time they're 15, they are in charge of their own days. And they're peers are being told when to stand up, when to sit down, when they can use the toilet. They're all looking at the same books. They're all taking the same tests. They're all wearing the same clothes. They get on the same bus. They get up at the same time. They get home at the same time. They are absolutely in lockstep. Talk about a way to rob someone of their agency. I think the greatest gift you can give to a homeschool kid is that.
Yeah.
And I actually think being on the other side of it now, and I saw this many times with homeschool families where they had a student with a special need. They had a son or a daughter who simply could not learn to read, and they were struggling academically, so they had some kind of learning disability. Those kids, whom I now know as young adults, are the nicest, the most well-adjusted young people that you would meet anywhere. They look you in the eye, they shake your hand. They don't think there's anything wrong with them. They might not be, on the Star Trek, but they're going to become managers at a fast food restaurant or a Wawa or something like this. And they're good at their jobs because they have a sense of responsibility and they haven't been told and taught that there's something wrong with them.
Yeah.
I really feel that sometimes just not sending your kid to school, that alone is an advantage.
Yeah.
And then anything you add on to that is like icing on the cake. But the real cake is that they're not in that environment.
Yeah, I agree. The more I look into it, and like my reasons started out on episode 1, I talked about the reasons that I want to homeschool and then the reasons I'm fearful to homeschool. And then just this week, I really thought about that list and expanded it now that I've talked to, dozens of homeschooling families and really thought about the intricacies of these reasons and expanded on them. And I put a post on Instagram about it. And just from simple things like we had fire drills, but now they do shelter in place drills. And that's for school shootings. So kids are at young ages, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, getting this put into their mind that a peer or someone in the neighborhood might come in with a weapon and shoot them, and this is what they have to do. And that has to do something to the psyche, that alone, and not to mention what you think of guns and your trust for your peers or lack thereof trust in your peers because they could turn on you at any moment. That was one of them, all the way into, the ideology of the transgender and how, it's getting pushed so much by the government that I can now, I probably 5, 10 years ago, 20 years ago would have, let's go to the parade and march for the people, for equality. Now I see through that. If the government is pushing this so much, there is an ulterior motive to that, just like the women's movement of the 60s, So what I've come to realize, and I don't know if everybody would agree, but when you look at why China, just before they turned to a communist country, the government was pushing a genderless society. And when you remove the genders, you no longer have that physical attraction from a man to a woman. Well, then you're losing the marriage and the creation of a family, and you're losing the creation of a family bond. And then when you no longer have a family bond, or you don't ever have a family bond to live for, what's the purpose of living? Why are you living? Well, you look to your government then for answers. Well, government, tell me my meaning. Tell me my purpose. Well, I'll tell you your purpose. Your purpose is to serve us and usher in communism or socialism, whatever you want to call it. And that makes so much sense. And you mentioned before about how your kids, when they graduated from college, they got through the wokeness and didn't even want to be part of the alumni events for a couple of years. Was that even a conscious thing as you were raising your kids to teach them about, I don't know, your religion or your political values, but they came out knowing something different than what's being pushed in school today. Was it a conscious decision on your part? And were you afraid that they might meld with the crowd once they went into school?
The answer to that question is yes, I was. I definitely was, but I knew that they were going to go to college. And I knew that like 99% of college campuses are extremely liberal.
Mhm.
I wasn't so concerned about my oldest son when he went off because his ideas about the world were so well formed. He chose to study philosophy because he had read very, very deeply and has a well established kind of doctrine in his own mind. And he's also very calm. So I knew he wasn't going to get triggered. And he would be able to hold his own. So he got through all that and just found it a little bit disgusting at how overwhelming the pressure is to conform. My daughter, I think, swayed. She was a little bit I don't know what the right word is, but a little shaky. And I remember she was in her junior year when Donald Trump was elected president, and she started texting me saying the school, I mean University of Pennsylvania, actually brought little puppy dogs in to have the students sit with little puppy dogs in order to calm them down because the students were hysterical because they thought since Donald Trump had been elected president that the world was going to end. I mean, and I said to my daughter, I said, let me ask you something. Do your friends know anyone who might know someone who might know someone who might have voted for Donald Trump? She said, no. I said, but what does that tell you about their lives? How could they be so isolated that they don't even know someone who knows someone who knows someone who voted? How could they be so separated, so many degrees of separation from what ended up being, what was it, 70 million people who voted for the man? How could they not know a single one? Like, that doesn't make sense, and it tells you something about their worlds.
Yeah.
I said, because half the people that she knew voted for him, half the people she knew didn't. Okay,
Mhm.
that's pretty good. That's a pretty good mix. And
Mhm.
I was explaining that to her. I said, you're more normal in that you have seen both sides and you understand that this was entirely possible. I said, but it's not normal to not know anyone who might have
Or
voted in a different
they
way.
didn't admit it, which is, you know, I grew up
Their
in a
shock was
time where you weren't supposed to talk about who you voted for. Like that was in the
right,
80s and early 90s. You didn't talk about that at
right,
all. Now it's like, you better tell me, and then I'm not going to be your
right,
friend again when you tell me the
right.
answer I don't want to hear.
But I think that that got her thinking a little bit about where she was. And when she first graduated, she was, I would say, middle of the road, a little to the left. About a year later, she was back to being who she was when she went away to college, which is frankly a little middle of the road, little to the right.
Hmm.
She's not extreme in either way, but she just came back to being herself after
Yeah.
about a year out of the madness, what I would
And
call the madness.
that's nice too. That's good for her. And I had made a transition too, growing up completely liberal. And I voted for Obama. I voted for Clinton in that election. And I remember saying to my sister, like, you embarrassed me because you voted for Trump. And when COVID hit and I started seeing doctors say, I'm treating patients and this drug is working and it's been around for 60 years and it has no side effects, and the and then all these doctors came out of the woodwork, and I'm doing, there was a gentleman in France saying, yes, I'm using
Mhm.
that too and it's working for my patients, and there was another woman on the other side of the country, yes, it's working for, and they were all on
Yes.
the White Coat Summit in DC, and
Mhm.
it was just removed off of Facebook. And to me, I
Mhm.
was like, I think that was the first time I experienced censorship. And like, you have an answer and you're removing it from Facebook. What does Mark Zuckerberg, the dweeb in college that couldn't get a girlfriend, so he created Facebook to meet women in college? Why is he deciding what information I can know? It doesn't make any sense. And kind of like you were talking about before, garbage in, garbage out, except what if it's facts in, facts out, because we don't want you to know them and we want you to think a certain way. And from
Mhm.
there, my husband's always been conservative, and I started really looking into just different things that, if the media said Trump said this, well, I pulled up the speech that Trump said, and I'm like, Well, they left a lot of that out. They took this part and then they took this part and put it together.
Mhm.
And they left out all the other stuff. And then I started seeing clips from Biden where he, used the N word, or where he voted the three strike rule to put the majority of black individuals in the 90s, in
Mhm.
1996, in jail, which ruined, all the fathers of black families, are in jail. And now these poor moms trying to raise these kids in a fatherless home, that's not good for them. And I'm putting on Facebook, guys, did you realize this? Did you know what I learned? And nobody wanted to hear it. So, it is what it is, but that was kind of my realization. And I think I'm at the point
Yeah.
now where I don't believe anybody in politics. I think once you get that high up, you're bought and paid for. Somehow
Yep.
they've got you with money or on video doing something that you don't want other people to see that you did. So
Yep.
especially
Yeah.
working
I
in government,
agree.
I know how contracts work. Contracts are signed, and even you watch shows like Dope Sick, and that is a true you know thing where you're the head of the FDA making laws to get through this pharmaceutical company's drug, and then, oh, you retired early and now you're the CEO of that pharmaceutical company or very high up. And I think
Right.
we need to teach our kids that sort of discernment as parents, whether you home educate or you send them to school. That's got to be conversations that we have. And
Mhm.
I definitely think you see it more in the home education families that they're having these talks. Because I
Well,
went
that's
to
right. Yeah.
SUNY Albany, and I know that Turning Point USA wasn't even allowed to speak at our campus. It was just, this is a racist group. They can't speak at our campus. But did any of those people making that decision ever watch or read anything that Turning Point USA published? I doubt it.
The censorship, it's really flabbergasting. And I think that's the one thing I'm really glad that social media has brought that to the forefront. I think that most Americans now are very aware,
Mhm.
whereas 5 years ago we were not. Maybe COVID was the catalyst that, you know, kind of brought it all down. But
Absolutely.
I'm glad because it's been going on forever.
Yeah. And
You
I
know,
had no
it's
idea.
not
I
something
was in a
new.
matrix. My mom still is.
Oh yeah, there are plenty of people who still are. Yes. I was at a wedding recently where the person I was sitting next to just said, I really love our president. I think everything he's doing is great. He's just doing such a great job. And I laughed out loud. And then I went, oh, actually, she's serious. So I didn't want to be impolite. So I just was like, oh, okay, yeah. All right. So there we go.
It took a lot for me to swallow my pride to say, okay, I shouldn't have voted for Hillary Clinton, and, maybe Trump isn't as bad, or maybe he is. I don't know. I don't know the man. But the policies, that's all I know, right? I can look and see
Hmm.
what bills were signed and that sort of thing. And but it's hard to swallow your pride and say I was kind of misled or whatnot, but there's a lot of people that can't do it. And even for me so then, yeah, after being on the Trump train, to then say, okay, guys, I don't think we can trust anyone in our government because they're probably the opposite sides to the same bird. And we really need to be in on this
Hmm.
as the people, we the people. We need to become more self-sufficient. We need to bring businesses back here, and whether it starts at the local level or not. I mean, the people up there in the White House, it's too high up there in their own thing. We need to bring it back to the local elections and to just becoming self-sufficient in our own homes and, with our children.
That's right. That's right.
Crazy
The whole
times.
self-sufficiency thing. I love that whole topic. That's basically what I read about in my spare time when I read. I love the idea of growing my own food and eventually not going off the grid or anything quite that ambitious. I'm a little too old for that. But just being less dependent
Hmm.
on all the services and a little more aware of how fragile all those services are.
I know my
Yeah.
husband, he does commercial HVAC, but I mean, he works with nuclear plants and, all that stuff. And he's like, you would be surprised. It is one button to shut off all the electricity in probably
Mhm.
the entire state of New York.
Isn't that
He's
scary?
It's
It's so scary.
scary. And just
Yeah.
working in government for 15 years, I believe it. It's unorganized. It's people in positions because of a test score. You didn't have to work your way up in
Mhm.
that unit or field or anything. You're the next one on the list, so therefore you get the job. You might know nothing about it, but now you're signing contracts. And I mean, Cuomo, he got contracts for his buddies. Our taxpayer dollars are paying them. They're they messed up everything. It's wasted money, wasted time. And I'm sure that is just a drop in the bucket. It's really it makes you crazy.
Crazy.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
what would advice be now that you're at the other end of the spectrum from a lot of moms that just kind of woke up during COVID and are now like, I got to
Mhm.
homeschool my kid. I can't send them to public school. What advice would you have for us?
Well, a couple of things. What kids really want the most, what they want more than anything in the world is our time, right? And that's the thing that's hardest to give them is that like time. I think that the first decision a homeschooling parent has to make in order to become successful at the job is that decision. You're going to give them your time. So that means you're not going to do all the things you want to do. You can always carve out, and I always carved out a little bit of time for myself at the end of the day where I would exercise and have like my own, like a little treat and a cup of decaf. And then, okay, fine. So I had time for myself. But everything else during the day, it was about them and it was for them. So with that as a backdrop, I think that taking them places, traveling, I think, if you, to focus on a curriculum and to check boxes all day is a mistake. You want them to come out in the world not thinking like inside of a box. You want them thinking outside of a box all the time. So I wouldn't give them books that come in a box and have you working like within that box. I would take them places to museums and spend time talking about ideas. And wherever you go, just to be asking, well, I wonder why the people here do this. Why do you think that it evolved that way? To be engaged with them in conversation. I mean, there were times I would lose my voice because we were talking. My kids and I were talking so much about something we saw at a science museum or an art museum. We did a lot of museums. I mean, at least once a week, we went to a museum before they all started into their sports and stuff like that. Teaching them basic skills, cooking. I had this theory that a good homeschool has three parts to it. It's one third dojo, one third cafeteria, and one third library. So to go back to that, like the dojo is, it doesn't matter whether you live in a city or a country, but it's just making sure that they have plenty of time to play, unstructured play, where, you don't sit them down in front of the Legos and like, you got 30 minutes, quick, put together your Legos because then we got to leave. But just unstructured time for them to do what they want, make a mess inside, outside, and taking physical risks, jumping from one thing to another, maybe falling down and scraping their knee. It doesn't matter. So the idea of dojo is that for them to reach their physical potential, they have to do a lot of stuff without a lot of supervision. So you have to figure a way to get that in there. And it can be inside the house or outside the house. The cafeteria, that's the kitchen. And I really am pretty serious about nutrition and making sure that they're not eating fast food. One of the greatest advantages that you have as a homeschooler is that you can provide home cooked meals. It's way better than processed meals. And so once they learn how to do it themselves, the old Bible verse, rather than like give them a fish, teach them how to fish. I invested time teaching them how to make the things they really liked. They liked making pancakes from scratch. I'm going to show you how to do it. Here's, just these ingredients are the only ones you need. Now make yourself some pancakes. And they had all different cafes. They used to make up cafes. They would make up little menus and they would make me buy a cookie off the menu from them. They could spend an entire afternoon doing something like that. So the kitchen was a hub and I taught them to cook and I did a lot of cooking.
Mm-hmm.
And they came to like real food. And they
Mm-hmm.
eat real food. They eat meat and potatoes and vegetables, and they know how to bake cakes and things like that. So I think that the dojo, the cafeteria, and then the library is just to fill your house with interesting books and not to have fights with them over what they want to read. I learned this early. My oldest son when he was about 6, got into these books called Secrets of the Drone. I hated it. It was sci-fi, and to me, it was junk reading. Of course, the library had like 50 of them, and he wanted to read every one of them. And I just like zipped it up and said, okay, Secrets of the Drone, it is. And he read every single one of this. He became such an enthusiastic reader because I let him choose what he wanted to do. So I think having books lay around everywhere. A lot of times families will, over the years, have asked me to come to their house because they want to talk to me because their kids won't read. My kids won't read. I don't know why my kids won't read. And I look around the house and I don't see any books. I said, well, where are all your books? Do you read? And they're like, no, my husband and I, we don't read. I said, well, try setting up a reading hour where all the devices get turned off, but let them read what they want. If it's Ripley's Believe It or Not book, so what? Just let them, give them some choice in this realm. So the dojo, the cafeteria, the library, I think that it just hits the 3 main realms of healthful living. If you're reading well and you're eating well and you're moving around, then all the other stuff is going to get filled in. It doesn't take long to sign up for a little chemistry class or something. They'll get all that other stuff. And frankly, half of it they don't need. They're not going to college. Most of it they don't need. Mm-hmm. But they do need know how to read critically. Mm-hmm. And, I think it's important to emphasize that. So I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Oh, absolutely.
But I have a suggestion. Mm-hmm. I have a suggestion. You're probably aware of this, but I didn't become aware of this company until 2011, I think. It's called Learning Unlimited. Okay. So it's a nonprofit organization that organizes graduate students in universities all over the country to teach classes on Saturdays to kids on any subject under the sun. So the classes might be like the chemistry of chocolate brownies or the Latin in Harry Potter, how to make a lollipop, fossils. It could be some extreme topic in math or geometry. They tend to be fairly arcane, but they're broken down into a small piece and made like intellectually available to like middle school age kids. And they're cheap. You sign up and it's like $30 for the day, and your kid might go to 4 or 5 different classes.
Oh, wow.
And it's all over the country. It's primarily the East Coast. Okay. Most of the schools on the East Coast there's one, Columbia, MIT, all the major universities, and also some just like regular universities. And they're springing up everywhere. And when we first went, we did a 2-day learning thing at MIT. And I took 3 of my kids. My oldest was in college by then. And they said, unbelievable. We finally feel like we're around our people. Like, these are kids who really are interested in learning. They will not let parents pick out the classes. The kids pick out the classes. You don't have to take notes. There is no test. And if you're not interested in paying attention, they just kindly ask you to go and sit in the back of the room and just don't make noise. So they don't care if you don't learn anything. They just want the kids who are really interested in learning to be able to ask questions, and they just talk. It was wonderful. We went to as many as we could in a year, and I never stopped going. And they even have special weekends that they have things like at Yale. They have one where it's 3 or 4 weekends in a row on a particular topic. So you can actually get to know the other kids in the class and actually get some good learning in. They'll take you to the Peabody Museum and you'll learn about every single thing that's there. This is the kind of stuff that makes learning exciting.
Yeah.
And not dull. You're sitting at the kitchen table with a workbook, like, it's as dull as death, right? So I would say do as many things like that as you can. But you see, it does all begin with giving them your time.
Yeah. I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. And you said it was called Learning Unlimited? Learning Unlimited. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's amazing.
It's just a wonderful organization. And like I said, there are programs going on all the time, all over the country. They just started back up last year. Of course, they had to give it up over COVID. It was all online during the COVID years, but that's just not the same as being there and seeing other kids with whom you feel simpatico because,
Yeah.
they also gave up their Saturday to come and learn about rocks and minerals
Right.
or whatever the topic is.
Yeah, and that's what I've loved about this podcast is like just learning all the different things. Like I hadn't heard of this one yet, and there I always write down the resources and put them in the show notes so that people can go back and look at it and have a link to go to in case they are driving and missed it. But I mean, stuff like that is amazing. And
Yeah.
who knew that it was even that it
Right?
existed.
It's a well-kept secret. I don't understand it. The MIT one is now so popular, theirs is the largest, that it's a lottery system. When it first opens, you quickly apply, and then they'll let you know if you got in or not. There are up to like kids just pouring into the classrooms, and the students, I have to say, do a fantastic job. I now volunteer to go and talk to parents at
Oh,
these
that's
events because lots of
wonderful.
times parents stay around. They don't want to leave, like, say, a 12-year-old. They're not going to go home and leave their 12-year-old with, because these kids also have to figure out how to get around campus because they're not all the classes in the same room. So since the parents tend to hang around, they look for some programming for the parents. So I have volunteered many times to talk to anybody who wants to hear more about homeschooling, and usually the room fills up, and I talk until I don't have a voice.
Oh, that's amazing.
Not hard to imagine, huh?
No, that's amazing. I'm sure you're a wealth of knowledge and so helpful to these families. Rosemary, thank you so much for being with us today. So quickly, we run up on an hour, but
I know, I can't
this is
believe that. Yeah.
this has been so wonderful to hear and so heartwarming and so nice to see that, four children grown, and I always love hearing, will they homeschool their kids? Because then you kind of really know, like, did they
Right,
appreciate it and do they want
right.
to provide this for their kids? So congratulations to you. They sound like they were
Thank
just
you.
so wonderful. And to you on your new career at this side, that
Thank you.
and that's a big thing. And that's something that, I had discussed on the previous podcast too, where women, we can have it all, just maybe not all at the same time.
Thank you.
So,
Indeed, that is true. Truer words were never spoken. Yep.
well, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
Same here. Thanks for having me.